Unprecedented FBI search at the home of former President Trump at Mar-a-Lago in Florida.
Search of former President Donald Trump's Florida home caused shockwaves.
Federal agents removed 11 sets of classified documents, including some that were labeled top secret.
Hello and welcome to The Nexus. Is Donald Trump going to be charged with a crime, or is he going to run for re-election? Two incredibly different possible outcomes, but that is how mad US politics is right now. Last week, the FBI raided his home in Florida in order to retrieve, they say, top secret documents he took from the White House. Trump complained bitterly about his beautiful home being under siege and said the documents were declassified anyway. His supporters say he's the victim of a political witch hunt aimed at stopping him from running again, but his critics say he is a wanted man and could go down for breaching the Espionage Act. We'll hear from our experts in a moment, but first let's take a closer look at the raid in Mar-a-Lago.
There's breaking news out of Palm Beach, Florida. Former President Trump says his Mar-a-Lago home there is being raided by the FBI right now.
The FBI stormed the private home of former President Donald Trump. The raid reportedly over an investigation into classified documents. Right.
This is a statement from former President Donald Trump. These are dark times for our nation.
It means that by definition, the FBI went with an affidavit of probable cause to a magistrate, to a judge, and demonstrated that it is more likely than not that there is evidence of a criminal activity.
He says, quote, "They even broke into my safe."
Ever since the FBI came knocking on Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago front door on August the 8th, looking for classified documents, the political speculation, point scoring, and dare one say it, conspiracies have run amok. Something like 20 boxes were reportedly carted away by the feds. Apparently they contained, among other things, confidential information about the President of France and documents marked top secret and sensitive, the highest classification there is. There are some suggestions they might even contain information on America's nuclear arsenal. Conservative commentators and speculators smell a rat.
The new plot line is that he stole the nuclear secrets. It's an obvious sympathetic attempt to try to derail Donald Trump's potential re-election campaign in 2024.
The Don himself has insisted that he personally declassified all the documents he took away from the White House, which he says is the right of the president to do. Trump now has the dubious accolade of being the first commander-in-chief to face an investigation under the Espionage Act. It's also the first time an ex-president's home has been searched in a criminal probe. In divided America, though, this isn't just about an investigation.
I support Trump. I against the FBI.
Polarized political battle lines have been drawn.
Top Republicans across the country are backing the former president in condemning this raid by the FBI.
Those Republicans accuse President Biden of using the Department of Justice as a political weapon to neuter Trump. But perhaps this could actually help him.
He issued a campaign-style commercial within hours. This was prepared in advance.
Trump supporters are also suggesting the raid may be linked to shadowy figures trying to prevent the former president from running again.
Well, this proves something that Devin Nunes said many times on your show, Maria, and that is the deep state is real.
Democrats, on the other hand, say there is no conspiracy, that the raid is so unprecedented there's no way the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, would have allowed it to go ahead unless he had extremely compelling evidence.
Merrick Garland has outsmarted Donald Trump at every turn.
Which leads to another conspiracy floating around. A report in Newsweek suggests that a former high-level member of Trump's team may have flipped and is spoon-feeding info to the FBI.
It's gone on past politics. You look at the attorney generals, you look at district attorneys all over the country. All they want to do is they want to get Donald Trump.
The only thing we know for certain at this point is that there's plenty more to come with this story, and that Trump supporters and detractors will use it for their own purposes. Well, that's politics for you. Now, before we take a closer look at the legal aspects of this story, I just want to briefly introduce you to today's panel. And we have Richard Painter, who was the chief ethics lawyer for President George W. Bush. He thinks the raid was justified. Matt Tito takes the opposite view. He is a Republican political strategist and big Trump supporter. And finally, we'll be hearing from Aaron Good, who is the author of American Exception, Empire, and the Deep State. We'll hear from them in just a second. But first, a quick look at the legal terms being used in this story and a bit more on who's who. It's reported that the FBI requested a search warrant from a judge in Florida, Bruce Reinhart, after receiving a tip-off about classified documents from someone close to Donald Trump. We don't yet know who that person is. That doesn't stop the media speculating. Was it Melania? Was it Tiffany? One of his sons? The speculation is endless. Now you have to remember that the FBI reports to America's top law enforcement official, the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, so they needed his approval too.
I personally approved the decision to seek a search warrant in this matter.
The search warrant was sealed. In other words, it wasn't accessible to the public. However, after Trump talked about it publicly, Merrick Garland decided to release it for all to see.
The department filed the motion to make public the warrant and receipt in light of the former president's public confirmation of the search, the surrounding circumstances, and the substantial public interest in this matter.
And here it is, the search and seizure warrant. You'll notice that Judge Bruce Reinhart's signature is at the bottom. You'll also notice that the judge writes, "I find that the affidavit or any recorded testimony establish probable cause to search and seize the person or property." Unfortunately, that affidavit, which could reveal who provided the tip-off, has not, at the time of recording anyway, been released, although there is intense pressure from Trump and the media to do so.
Was there unprecedented justification? That remains an open question, and we know exactly where to look, and that is the affidavit of probable cause, the one document that remains under seal. So because we don't have that information, I've encouraged all of my colleagues on the left and the right to reserve judgment.
The warrant also specifies the property to be seized and includes any physical documents with classification markings. It also mentions national defense information or classified material, which is probably why the media is speculating about nuclear weapons.
Significant reporting by the Washington Post. This is what it says, quote, "Classified documents relating to nuclear weapons were among the items FBI agents sought in a search of former President Trump's Florida residence on Monday."
As we've heard, Trump and his supporters think this is all a political witch hunt. They point out that Judge Reinhart is on the record as having donated to the Obama campaign in 2008. They also point out that the head of the FBI reports to the Attorney General, who reports to President Joe Biden. However, the White House denies it has anything to do with the raid, and others point out that the head of the FBI, Christopher Wray, was appointed by Trump.
President Trump took to Twitter. Let's just take a look at that tweet. He says, "I will be nominating Christopher A. Wray, a man of impeccable credentials, to be the new director of the FBI."
But Trump isn't having any of it. He says he smells a conspiracy cooked up by a corrupt and politically motivated FBI. Let's go to our panel now. We'll start with Richard Painter. Richard, as we've heard in those reports, President Donald Trump is vehemently opposed to the raids and passionately characterizes them as a political witch hunt carried out by a corrupt FBI. You think the raids were justified. Why?
I do not know all of the facts. We'd have to see the affidavit that was submitted to the judge in order to know exactly why the FBI sought the warrant and why the judge approved it. Under the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, the FBI or the police, law enforcement, may not search someone's home without a warrant signed by a judge upon a showing of probable cause that a crime has been committed and that the evidence being sought in the search is relevant to the crime. That information would be set forth in the affidavit. These affidavits are almost never disclosed to the public in connection with a search warrant. Eventually, the information in the affidavit does come out at trial if anyone were to be criminally charged in connection with the crime for which the probable cause was shown. But we're way ahead of ourselves here. All we have is a showing of probable cause and a warrant signed by a judge pursuant to the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, which justified the search as it would just about any other search. And these searches are common in criminal cases, in criminal investigations. Sometimes there are criminal charges, sometimes there are not.
President Trump says that it is within his gift, as it were, as a former president, to declassify the documents he took. Is that true? Can a president declassify documents like that?
A president has the power to declassify documents as the commander-in-chief. That is within his Article 2 powers. So if Donald Trump, while he was president, had wanted to declassify the documents, he could have done that. And then he would have said they were declassified. Everyone in the intelligence community would know they were declassified. And the FBI and the Justice Department would not now be referring to them as classified documents or telling a judge they're classified documents. But Donald Trump didn't do that. So it doesn't matter what's in his power and what's not. There is no evidence that he declassified the documents. So that's not a relevant consideration here, unless someone can show me how he declassified the documents. But merely taking them down to your own home and keeping them after your presidency is not declassifying the documents.
Matt, Tito, I think that's where you come in. President Trump says he declassified them. Presumably, you agree that he did.
Well, I just don't know what they even went after or what they had. I mean, what I understand from the warrant that was that came out publicly was that they had collected 15 boxes of classified documents. Well, what was in those classified documents, we still don't know yet. But to think that Trump was at the White House on his last day in office, packing up those boxes himself to bring to Mar-a-Lago, to put in the closet next to his golf clubs, is ridiculous. Donald Trump wasn't packing his own boxes. So whoever packed those boxes and whatever documents are in there was somebody else who did that. And again, we don't know what documents are even in there. But I just can only imagine there's probably a million other ways you could have gotten these documents from Donald Trump instead of raiding his home at 6 a.m. in the morning, something that's never been done in the history of the United States. No former president's home has ever been raided by the FBI quite like this. They could have handled this a different way. They could have used the lawyers to get those documents. And then once they realized the classified documents narrative that came out wasn't really sticking with the people, with the American voters, then they rose to the level of, well, Donald Trump had nuclear codes in those boxes. So this is getting ridiculous. It's getting outlandish. They need to produce some proof at some point, or this is going to be a political boomerang for the Democratic Party here in the United States, and they may not win another election for a long time after this.
If we look at the search warrant, attached to that is the receipt for property, and we do get some idea of what is in those boxes. We know that the executive grant of clemency, the pardon, in other words, for Roger Stone is in there, some information on the president of France, and so on. Let's talk about how they carried out the raid, Richard Painter. I think Matt Tito was basically saying there was no need to carry it out like this, as if he were, a terrible and violent criminal. After all, they had visited Mar-a-Lago before, and they had been invited to come back and check again. Why not go as invited guests, as it were, rather than seek a search and seizure warrant?
Well, I think if you are in possession of classified documents at a time when you are not authorized to possess those documents, they're going to come and get them. And whether Donald Trump committed a crime or whether somebody else packed the boxes and Donald Trump didn't even know about it, and Donald Trump didn't even know they were in his safe, I don't know. We'll figure that out later. But if you got classified documents that are not authorized, you're going to end up getting hit with a search warrant. And this is very important under the Espionage Act. And the Espionage Act doesn't necessarily mean espionage. But you have violations of the Espionage Act ranging from Sandy Berger, who was Clinton's advisor, who stuffed classified documents in his socks and got criminally charged. Serious, but not, the most serious thing in the world, all the way up to Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, who took classified nuclear secrets and gave them to the Russians and went to the electric chair. So you have a range of different violations with respect to classified documents. But we take classified information very seriously. President Bush asked me to give ethics lectures to the entire White House staff after we had a scandal in the Bush administration where somebody had leaked classified information about the identity of Valerie Plame, a CIA agent. And President Bush made it very, very clear that I was to explain to everyone on the White House staff the criminal penalties that would attach to anyone who engaged in unauthorized use or possession of classified information. And one thing President Bush always said is that these rules, every rule that you talk to the White House staff about, applies to me too as the president. No one is above the law. And that was the standard in the Bush White House. And that is the standard that we must apply if we want to live in a representative democracy. No one is above the law, including the president.
Matt Tito, nobody is above the law. I just want you to pick up on that point. I have heard plenty of conservative commentators saying that Merrick Garland hasn't prosecuted Democrats. So it appears that some people are above the law to them. What do you think?
Yeah, the problem is there are people in the United States of America that are above the law. And the problem that the American people have with this entire situation is that you don't have the FBI or the DOJ going after Hillary Clinton, who deleted 30,000 emails. You don't have people going after Hunter Biden and Joe Biden for their overseas dealings and things like that. There's absolutely a two-tier justice system in the United States of America, and the American people are absolutely sick of it. And so I think a lot of American people now, they want to abolish the FBI. They just want to get rid of it because it's become so politicized, and the American politicians use the FBI in order to take out their political opponents. I mean, this is case in point right here. And the DOJ needs to be revamped. It needs to be taken very closely, take a look at it. And some things need to change because the American people aren't going to stand up for this.
Can I just quote President Donald Trump on his own social media platform, Truth Social? He said, "The FBI has a long and unrelenting history of being corrupt. Just look back at the days of J. Edgar Hoover." Now, we can't just take President Trump's word for it. We spoke to a former FBI agent, long service at the agency. He didn't want to say anything on the record, as it were, attached to his identity, but he did tell us the following. He says, "The FBI is not what it used to be, and he's never seen anything like what is taking place now." He says, "The FBI has lost its virtues and become political. That for some reason, different rules apply for Trump." He also says that requesting a search warrant from a judge after going through documents at Trump's home in June and being welcomed back is weird and unjust. At this point, I'd like to pick up with Aaron Good. You're the author of America Exception, Empire and Deep State. Is it your belief that the FBI has also become political?
Well, I think the FBI has been political forever. I mean, we talk about McCarthyism as this dark period in U.S. history, but a better name for it would have been Hooverism. The information that McCarthy used to engage in his anti-communist witch hunts came from Hoover, and it was political in motivation on a bigger scale than even the targets of the information. It sort of wiped out the establishment left, the New Deal left at the time, and moved America to the right, and they have gone after civil rights activists, the new left back in the 60s, anti-war veterans. They have been very politicized for a long time. A lot of these abuses came out in the 70s in the Church Committee report, and there's a great quote in there from an FBI officer who was just saying, we never even really worried about if something was legal or not when we were carrying these kind of acts out. We were just concerned about expediency. And that's the way that the national security state has operated since the end of World War II in the United States. So anyone who's saying that they are suddenly scandalized by the fact that the FBI has become politicized has a blinkered view of recent U.S. history.
Well, that's probably in great part due to the government's own kind of publicity for itself and Hollywood's portrayal of the FBI and CIA, for example, as guardians of the democracy and the protectors of the democracy and people. Your contention is that actually the FBI is part of the deep state, which is something that President Trump has referred to, his supporters have referred to, and even here in the UK, Nigel Farage, the big Brexit leader, has referred to. Can you just explain for our viewers who don't know much about the deep state how you would define it?
Well, in the broadest sense, the deep state is all of those institutions that allow for the top-down governance in a nominally democratic political system. So this helps to explain why policies, especially foreign policies, never really change very much across presidential administrations since the end of World War II. So it's really as the U.S. becomes a global empire that you have this sort of deep state. And I think that the reason is that running a global empire and maintaining the politics domestically and internationally is not possible if you adhere to democratic principles and to the rule of law in general. And so you need this kind of this force shrouded in state secrecy and endowed with the ability to break the law when need be, a license to kill, as it were, sometimes, to run an empire while having a cover story of democracy. And I think that that's a big part of the story of how our institutions have eroded in the last 75 plus years.
So do you see President Donald Trump, or former President Donald Trump, as outside of the deep state and that he is a threat to it? Is that the idea?
Well, I think that Donald Trump represents certain segments of the establishment, but probably on the fringe. And it's unusual in U.S. history because it's the deep state, as it were, going after a figure largely on the political right. I believe that he is a bad look for the people running and managing U.S. hegemony over the world, and that it's kind of an embarrassment, and that on top of it, he engages in protectionism and other policies that may be alarming to people who are for this empire of free trade the U.S. has constructed. So there's different reasons why Trump is so reviled by these people. But the least of which is that he's lawless, because that is the sort of status quo of the regime.
I believe you said that if this attempt to stop Trump from running again in 24 doesn't work, we might even see an attempt at an assassination. Now, this is to most people incredibly far-fetched, but why would you say that?
Well, I didn't quite put it that fine a point on it, but I've just pointed these are entities that have removed American leaders in the past. I mean, if you look at the John Kennedy assassination, you find out that RFK and LBJ and Richard Nixon all suspected that it was the state and the CIA was involved in that, and nobody did anything about it. So I believe, and I was discussing with your producer, the possibility that that would happen, but I also think that that would be such a bad look for the people running things. I mean, anybody can be killed. We're all human. We're all mortal. But I wouldn't guess that they would go that this fate would befall Trump, because it would be too much of a horrible spectacle given the history of the United States and the paranoia of Trump's base to begin with. It would be, I don't think that that's in the cards.
Richard Painter, you worked in the George W. Bush administration. Do you find talk of a deep state frustrating and ridiculous, or is there something to it?
Well, the phrase deep state is just a lot of nonsense, but there are serious issues about the conduct of the CIA and the FBI over the years, and American interventionism overseas, for sure, and we went through that in the Bush administration. But let's talk about this FBI. Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, was appointed by Donald Trump after Donald Trump fired another Republican who was heading up the FBI, James Comey, because James Comey was investigating connections between the Trump campaign and the Russians. James Comey, I criticized severely in the New York Times in October of 2016 for improper conduct and violations of the Hatch Act, because he literally threw the election to Donald Trump by putting out a letter to Congress talking about a laptop that the FBI had obtained that had Hillary emails. It turned out those Hillary emails were really already emails that Comey had looked at and the FBI had looked at. We went on for years and years talking about Hillary Clinton's email, and yet the director of the FBI puts out a statement a week before an election talking again about Hillary Clinton's emails if they're going to reopen the investigation. And of course, there was nothing there. And if it weren't for James Comey and the FBI, Donald Trump probably wouldn't have been elected president in 2016. So I've been very critical of the FBI. I've also been critical of Democrats. I have called for an investigation of whether the current ambassador to Germany was truthful with the United States Senate about $86 million of money that she received as president of the University of Pennsylvania from the Chinese, and said she didn't know anything about. I have fully supported the United States Attorney in Delaware investigating Hunter Biden, and I believe strongly that the Justice Department needs to let that United States Attorney do his job.
Matt Tito, we're coming towards the end of the program. The White House has said it didn't know anything about the raid before it actually happened. Do you accept that explanation?
No, I don't believe that at all. I mean, this White House, this Biden administration has been lying to us from day one. And so to think that the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, would order a raid on the former president of the United States home in Mar-a-Lago without running that past the White House and the Biden administration is laughable. So they're completely lying about that, and maybe we'll find that out one day, whether or not they did know. But this goes all the way to the top at this point. And I think that the Democrats, I think that the Merrick Garland and the DOJ did not think that there would be so much blowback and pushback on this particular raid. They thought maybe they could go in, they can get the documents and get out, and nobody would talk about it. But that didn't seem to happen. And now I think it's blown up in their face. And if they don't have the nuclear codes in those boxes, if they don't have something to nail Trump to the cross, this is going to blow up in their faces, because you do not raid the former president of the United States home without having the goods on him. And I'm not sure that they do.
Matt Tito, Aaron Good, Richard Painter, thank you all very much for your contributions to The Nexus today. Much appreciated, and thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.